Yeah, this one got to me. It got to me so hard that after finishing watching the episode, usually what I do is I watch it, get my coat on, turn off all the sources of noise, and hit record. Just bam, bam, bam. This time I sat here and just kind of reflected for a bit. See, this was the final episode recorded. So from a real life perspective, from an out of character perspective, this is the last episode of Babylon 5. I know. There's the books. There's the Centauri trilogy. There's the Psychor things, the two-parter they've got going on. The Crusade thing happened, and I think they did, two direct-to-TV movies after this? I'm not actually sure. But as far as Babylon 5 goes, the show, this was the end. And I want to talk about that first, because I have been asked if I'll be covering other Babylon 5 works, and my answer has universally been no. But I've never fully given an answer as to why, and I want to do that. And it really kind of came together as I've been going through the last few episodes of Season 5, and it just hit me when I was thinking about this episode, today, within the last hour. Babylon 5 is its own story within a setting of Babylon 5. The Babylon 5 setting continues on. There are other stories to be told. Not every plot thread is tied up. JMS himself actually made a somewhat sardonic remark about how Lord of the Rings doesn't actually tie up every plot thread. And all this stuff is dangling, and how dare you? And Babylon 5 does the same thing, for good or for ill. But the idea is that the story of Babylon 5, the station and the series, has concluded. And therefore, since Babylon 5 is the show I wanted to cover, and Babylon 5 is the show that I fell in love with, I felt it would be most appropriate to not, for lack of a better term, taint that with any of the ancillary works. I'm not saying they're all bad, although I don't actually care for Crusade, at all, really. And most of the direct-to-TV movies are just kind of there. But this is the show I wanted to cover. This is the show that was requested. This is the show that I'm doing. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the episode proper. We're still, of course, kind of segueing things out. I made 3 quick notes here about characters who literally have cameos, but are nevertheless being showcased. Because, again, this is the epilogue. We're saying goodbye. One of the things I liked, and I wanted to talk about this, is Dr. Hobbs is back. For one scene, Dr. Franklin sees Dr. Hobbs and gives her the reins of Babylon 5's med staff. That's significant for one really small reason. It's the same actress. Now, for those of you who don't know, getting the same actors or actresses for roles, for voice acting or for physical acting both, is a little bit more of a hassle than you'd think, especially for a work that crosses years. I mean, contracts are contracts, but for the most part, you don't actually have a contract saying you always have to appear as such and such. Each time you're brought back, especially for a minor role, you are contracted for that episode. You're brought in for that episode, right? So, it's difficult to do, and maybe I just kind of got used to seeing random new nobodies in the background, but one thing that has always uplifted a fictional work for me is seeing the same faces or the same voices. Even if they're just background characters, the fact that it's still the same background character elevates the work for me. I've actually talked about this over on Voyager as well. And B5 is really good about bringing back the same actors for the same roles, so that it just adds that layer of continuity to it. And I know I use that word a lot, and actually what I mean in this case is contiguousness, as opposed to straight-up continuity, because what it does... I mean, they could have just brought back some other doctor and been like, hey, I want you to take over. And I'd look at that and be like, who's that? There's nothing there. It's just a scene of Dr. Franklin saying goodbye, whoop-de-doo. But this way I see it's the same actress, and now I know it's the same person from before who has been in several episodes before, including when Franklin went on his walkabout, just to name one off the top of my head. And I like that, because it makes it feel more real. Wrong word. It makes it feel more believable. It makes it feel more concrete, and I get more invested personally seeing that kind of recurring background stuff. B5, I've talked about this before. B5 is really good about that in general and tends to not forget things and carry them forward. Just to give you one example of this, there's actually a cryotube in the next episode that contains Marcus's body. And there's like a note on it, which actually I could read it for you right now. I've got a thing up for it. It actually, oh, hang on 1 second. The note actually says, cryogenic suspension chamber, subject Marcus Cole, designation Ranger, status deceased, comments indefinite hold in the event of new resuscitation technology requested by Commander S. Ivanova. And little tidbits like that really help make a work shine. I've actually talked about this recently when it comes to video games too. When you put a lot of detail into the little tiny things that you almost wouldn't notice, just background elements, that is what I usually refer to as polish. And Babylon 5, for all of its presentation problems, has a lot of polish. So, that was nice. Then we see Garibaldi and his approach to the board. He basically only has 2 scenes in this. One is the scene where he's talking to the board, and the other is where he's just looking over the thing during the final epilogue, speech ending the series. And it's very Garibaldi. I love his approach. Hey, you're all the troublemakers. You're all the bastards. You come in here. You're on the board now. You challenge me. You win. You're good. You fail. You're bad. And it's a very Garibaldi approach to the situation. I love that. The economic person in me wants to point out that that's not actually how a board of directors works, but I'm willing to let it go because it's an awesome approach. And, of course, Garibaldi's already shown that he's willing to go the non-legal route in order to get things done, so it's entirely possible that he is not legally gone forward and appointed all these directors to the board, but has pulled strings to ensure that each of them gets appointed to this. So I'm willing to let it go. Zach has a brief line as well. He is, of course, still on B5, one of the very few left. In fact, I think Veer is the only one of the original cast still left. So we've got Veer, Lockley, Zach, and a few other choice individuals. I'm sorry, I'm actually getting a little emotional. This episode hit me. This was the final B5 episode. I mean, yes, we're doing one more after this because, duh, I'll talk about that next week or next day or whenever it happens. But this was the last one they made, and it kind of shows. The scene where they're all saluting on B5 to the White Star, that hit me. It wasn't even the end of the episode. It still hit me. It's powerful stuff. But Zach's line, I'll probably still be here when they turn off the lights, makes me laugh. G'Kar, of course, has a great scene. First of all, I love the directing. It would have been easy to just have the whole scene be him up on the wall, on the view screen, talking to Talon. That would be a simple thing to do. But instead they cut back and forth between that and G'Kar standing, reciting his message to the view screen, while Talon stands next to him, listening to the message on the view screen. Very nice little directorial touch. Adds a little bit of personal touch to the moment and gives it some variety. I also like the idea of G'Kar's overall point. First of all, of course, the main goals he gives Talon. You need to rebuild, and you need to strengthen ties. Rebuilding is the obvious one, and the Narn are no, stranger to rebuilding. But strengthening ties with the other races, the Narn have never really done that. They're willing to stick it to the Centauri by helping out the humans, but they've never actually tried to truly bond with the other races, not like the way G'Kar wants them to. And I think that's going to really change how the Narn function societally and their place in the galaxy over the coming years. Here's hoping Talon manages to carry that message accurately. I also love G'Kar's perspective on this. I've often said that there's a lot of ways to express this, but there's intent and there's action. Is the general way to put that. You can be a good person and you can have the ability to do good things, but unless you have both, it doesn't mean anything, right? Or to quote Final Fantasy VII, power without determination is just as useless as determination without power. And G'Kar basically nails that philosophy very adequately and adamantly. Balancing thought and action is the way he particularly expresses this. And I like that. And I do agree that is, a lot of thought has been dumped on the Narn. Now they need to take action on that thought. So here's hoping that works out for them. So Sheridan says he wants no big goodbyes. So naturally, basically everyone is there to see him off. I admit that makes me laugh. Ah, frickin' things. I have a theory. It's just a quiet theory. It doesn't really matter. That Lockley actually is the one who leaked the report to ISN and therefore to the rest of the station, so they'd all be there to say goodbye. It's a nice touch. Sheridan isn't really that good at on-the-fly speeches. That's Jakar's territory. But I love how he's like, Sheridan's like, Delenn! Just hands it off to her. We get a tiny insight. I shouldn't say insight. It's more of a... I guess this is kind of a continuity thing. We know a lot about the Minbari culture. The fact that the Minbari have no word for goodbye, but instead the way they say goodbye is to insert other things like, we'll see you again. You know, instead of saying bye, they say, see you later. That may sound like a small and minor difference to us, but in the Minbari and the way they perceive things, you could see why it would be a big deal to maintain that distinction. And I like the idea of Delenn basically saying, no, we'll see each other again. From an out-of-character perspective, I have to admit that to me, I'm going to butcher this because I'm not good at on-the-fly speeches either, but the idea is that these will always be here. I mean, it's 2017 when I'm sitting here and recording this. I don't know when you're watching this. I imagine a lot of you will be watching this the same year, but you might be watching it years from now, or God, if everything goes well, you might even be watching this a couple decades from now. That'd be kind of awesome. But the idea is, it is, as of this point, been almost... That can't be right. No, yeah, it has almost been 30 years. No, 20 years. It has almost been 20 years, sorry, my math was off, since this episode came out. I don't mean my episode, I mean the episode Objects at Rest. And it's still there. This episode is still there. This stamp on history still exists. We may say goodbye, and Delenn may, and the actors and the actresses and the writers and the producers and the tech team and the editing team and Foundation Imaging have all moved on. But we never have to actually say goodbye to Babylon 5. Anymore, we have to say goodbye to any other work like this that has truly marked us, that we care about, because it's still there. Because after this, I can go back and rewatch Babylon 5, just like you can. We can go back and see these characters and these old classics with all the flaws and all the greatness still present and still a part of us in our lives. So we don't actually have to say goodbye. We could say, we'll see you later. And I like that. Now that sounds like something I'd end the episode on, but of course, this episode's constructed kind of weirdly because there's sort of a mid-crisis thing in the middle of it. So after this wonderful, amazing goodbye, an incident happens. A couple notes about that. First of all, you notice it's basically the same accident that happened when the Minbari, the religious caste, sabotaged the ship in order to destroy it. You remember that? It's not literally the same thing, but it does remind me a lot of that. And actually, when I first saw this, my first gut reaction was, oh my god, Lennier has sabotaged the ship. I was already suspicious about that whole you should command the ship back home thing. Turns out I was completely wrong, or at least I think I was. You can feel free to disagree on this. In fact, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about Lennier in general. Because what the hell happened with Lennier? He immediately goes to release Sheridan, hesitates, and then runs off. And then within seconds, within less than a minute, it's like, no, I can't do this, and starts running back to save him. I've spoken at length of the horror and strength of the in the moment, the concept of who and what we are in the moment, and how we can do things that we would never do, things that we look back on and think, why did I ever do that? I imagine most people watching this have had a moment like that in their lives, regardless of severity. Could be something small, could be something life-changing. But in the moment, when you're not really thinking, when your emotions are high, or when things are critical, you may or may not have done something, and you look back at it, and you have no idea why you did it. And it doesn't make any sense. It's not the kind of thing you would do. There's a lot that can be said about in the moment. It is my personal interpretation that this is Lennier's moment. That in the moment, he just acted. And then, of course, when his brain took over, that's when he starts rushing back. And the episode seems to frame it that way. Even Sheridan admits, no, I'd believe him if he said he was coming back to save me. And Lennier's final message about, I'm not coming back, I need to earn your respect. I need to earn your forgiveness. I need to make up for this. Speaks to how horrible in the moments can be. Because sometimes we spend most of our lives trying to recover for those simple, illogical mistakes. Or if we're lucky, it only takes a couple months. I mention this especially, though, because for me, this is the kind of thing that is expected. This is why I kind of, as much as I don't see it, it would not surprise me to learn that Lennier deliberately sabotaged the situation. You'll notice that when people start running away from the crisis situation, Sheridan starts running towards it, right? Because that's Sheridan. But what I'm trying to reach here is that this is the kind of thing I could see building in the back of Lennier's mind for a long time. Not just the jealousy, which is the base emotion, but the slightly more complex emotion of, well, what you're doing is wrong, and I need to correct it. It is so apparent to me that you and Sheridan should not be together. And, well, Minbari take things to 11, don't they? As I've talked about before. So, I need to correct you being with Sheridan, and one of the best ways to do that is to ensure his passing. Oh, and of course, just in case I don't point it out and someone might be like, oh, you forgot about this. No, Mr. Morden pretty much flat out said this was going to happen. And he was right. And here we are. I'm not sure what else I can say about Lennier. Franklin leaves the show quietly. Just kind of exits out the back door, says his goodbye to Sheridan. Good scene, by the way, where he's saying goodbye. We don't actually see the scene. We see it in the distance, but we don't hear their dialogue. It's just a distance shot. And then Franklin leaves the show. And then Lennier leaves the show under slightly more auspicious, less auspicious, I should say, circumstances. So then, then there's a scene which rends my heart in twain. Because Londo is on Minbar, and he's happy to see his friends. Everything's great. And he asks for some booze. Knowing what we know now, and it's a fun scene, because you could kind of see how Sheridan and Delenn are happy to see Londo. It's like, oh my god. But we see Londo, and we know what's going on. It's context horror. I've talked about this before. Someone in character doesn't understand what's going on, so they're like, ah! But the audience does, so they're like, oh god, no! And that's kind of what my reaction was, too. No! Because, see, Londo is there to give a keeper to their son, David, the son that will be, the one that is mentioned back in War Without End. So, Londo asks for alcohol. Any alcohol, whiskey, something. Nope, they don't have any. And my heart just breaks. Watch that scene. There is no denying, as far as I'm concerned, that Londo was desperately trying to bypass this, to not do this to them, to not do this to their son, to not engage in this order, or to at least warn them, to tell them what was going on, maybe even plead for death, I don't know. But he couldn't, because the only way he can really bypass the keeper is with that alcohol. And they don't have any. Minbari can't really do alcohol, so they don't have any on hand. So he does like he's told, gives away the keeper. And, yeah. And history will go as it should. And that's horrible. We do have one last episode, guys. I'm also going to start work on the finale. Thankfully, well, I guess you know this by this point, but the episode, which I had some footage in the background, was not universally blocked by Warner Brothers, so I will actually be able to go ahead and do the finale as planned. But for now, I'm going to recover for a bit, and then watch Rising Star, and I'll see you guys next time.